Okay, this is going to be a picture PowerPoint, and what I did when I talked to Matt's been a very experienced operator with alum addition for phosphorus removal over the years. So I couldn't get the tower, and unfortunately water's pretty hard in power right now, but I had some pictures from a previous community who actually went. Is Brian in here? Any of the Worcestershires in here? No? Okay, anyway. So I kind of stole some of the pictures that we actually did when we were out applying alum, but essentially Matt does the same thing. So we're going to use these photos to help you all understand how this process works, or how at least I'm finding that a majority of people are applying different boats. Hopefully we can get some interaction and some questions from you guys, because Matt has done this for how many years, Matt? 16 years. So there's not a whole lot of communities that have done alum addition for that long. Several of you I know out there have started this, or you now have your boat ramps in place and you're starting to order boats and these types of things. So those are the things that I really wanted to talk about. So Matt and I are going to kind of tag team here and talk about different things, and Matt's got to put a checklist in the PowerPoint on actually the steps that Matt goes through, okay? So, do I have here's the clicker. So just chime in at any time, anybody, please.
It's pretty impromptu. Matt Tuchel, I went to Vermillion Community College for 2 years under Kleist. I'm sure most of you know that program. I worked for can everybody hear me? Yes? No? Yep. Okay. I've worked for a tower for 16 years. Prior to that, I worked 2 years for the city of Babbitt. I've been doing alum addition. Actually, our system has been doing alum addition since 1987. We discharge into a designated trout stream, so we've got a 1 phos limit forever and ever and ever. I guess, are you doing the pictures, or? Go ahead and start rolling through the pictures.
Yeah. Just a question here. How many of you in the room right now have a stabilization pond system that you actually add alum to? Raise them high. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I think we could safely say that in the next 5 years, probably most of you, if you have ponds, are going to be raising your hand. So we'll share some ideas with you. Clicker doesn't work.
So these aren't pictures of my ponds. These are, which city was it?
This is in Serpent Lake Sanitary Sewer District over by Crosby, Ironton, Kiona area. But just, you know, Matt's got a boat launch just like this in a dock, and pontoon boat. Actually, Matt's pontoon is huge. Multiple, I think we got 4 pontoons on your boat. But maybe, Matt, I know this isn't your boat, but, you know, alum weighs a lot, I think, right?
Yeah.
And maybe just a lowdown on how you set up your boat, or why your boat is set up the way it is.
What we have is we have a sprayer system off the back. But what we have found over the years is that the sprayer system, there's a transfer pump on there that's got a 2-inch line, and it just is really hard to keep clean. And alum is so corrosive that it just pretty much eats everything up. So what we have done is we have a diaphragm pump, and we just throw the influent hose into the tank and then spray out of a 20-foot fire hose with just a fire nozzle on the end of it. I think the pump was fairly expensive, a couple $1,000, but it's a diaphragm pump. So the transfer pump, I was finding the impellers, even if you clean it, alum sticks so well to everything that you almost literally need to pull like the cover off the impeller and wipe it down to get rid of it. So this diaphragm pump we haven't had any issue with, because it's rubber. It's able to transfer the alum. We're able to then clean it out, and that's what we found works the best for us. So we go on the boat, we transfer 500 gallons onto the boat. I would guess that's a 500 gallon tank. Maybe that's what we have, is a 500 gallon tank. So the guy sits in the front basically, we put the fire nozzle as wide as spray as you can and spray it out. Your time, how fast your boat is going, it very much factors in with how well this works. And there isn't anything set that's like, this is how you do it. It's all based on experience, more or less.
Okay, alum weighs about 11.9 pounds per gallon, 12 pounds per gallon. So we start to do the math here. A pontoon boat, a 500-gallon tank, pretty soon we have an awful lot of weight. So it's very important that one thinks about, sizing of the boat, according to the acreage of your ponds. And I just want to caution you, what I've been seeing out there is there is specs out there for boats. But I found if you do a little bit more digging and you look into an actual boat manufacturer, not a bad idea to do. And I'm not picking on anybody that has a specific spec designed. And some of you, maybe Dave might agree with me, maybe not, but we don't need, like Matt had mentioned, all of these pumps, or I don't believe all of these pumps in small diameter piping, because typically they corrode and they fail. And some of these boats, $50,000, $60,000, as we order them to bring into your community, through a project. So if you're gonna buy a boat, give us a call, because there's a couple of pretty neat boats that were just built, and they're based out of Duluth, and they build them specifically for alum addition, and they will build them around your needs. So it's not a cookie cutter boat per se, it's something specific to your system. So just thought I'd throw that in there because you're gonna buy one sooner or later, or some type of an application process. This is just, here in Serpent Lake, they actually have a ground storage tank. They use obviously multiple semi-load tankers. There's about 80 acres of pond that they treat. Just a couple of shots to help you understand how, they're bringing product down to the boat.
And what we found is we used to have a 5,800-gallon storage tank on site, and we just order it now through Hawkins, and they come up when we need it, because it's actually 3 times the cost for them to come up. But what we found is alum, after so many years, it just settles out. So, the first application would be, a lot less strength, versus after maybe 2 years, you get down to the bottom of the tank, all of a sudden it's really high concentration alum. So when we order it now, it's the same every time, versus ordering 5,000 gallons, and now, when we'd add about 1,000 gallons at a crack. Well, we do 4 discharges, probably 2 additions, so you get maybe 3 years down the road sometimes. And it's got to stay heated. You can't let it freeze.
So that is a factor, and I know a lot of the systems that are being built, there's on-site storage, which is great, but like Matt said, if you're not going to empty that storage, or you're not going to heat that building, or remove the product from the tank, it's going to be a mess to clean up. And I'm finding a lot more of these storage vessels that are on site are not being used. So, talk to other people, talk to operators, talk to individuals. I mean, I'm not setting an example that storage vessels don't need to be on site. However, talk to some of the individuals that are doing this, like a Matt. I know Dave Larson's in here from Boston. A couple of the other guys that raised their hands. Ask some questions and see what your needs are, because it's expensive. I mean, why build something you don't need? I was just feeling here, I was with Brian out in the process here, just kind of a couple of shots. In Serpent Lake here, I think the next shot is kind of a shot down. This is actually a 2-inch hose that leaves the tank, and they gravity feed the system to the back of the boat. Runs through here, there's a 2-inch or 1.5 inch T, and it drops down. You can't really see here, but the actual 2-inch PVC comes just behind the prop. not in front of. And Brian will tell you, and maybe Matt would tell you that if you put the product prior to the intake of the motor, the corrosive alum will eat the cooling system up in your boat, or in your motors. So, you know, that's all trial and error, you learn these things. But you actually get some pretty good mixing just behind the prop areas. You can see here dual motors for better boat control. Some of these bigger ponds, you got 5,000 gallons of product on boat. To turn, oftentimes you need to reverse one motor and turn one up so that you can actually turn your boat. So this is gravity fed. As you can see here, there used to be a pump that he used, but elevation is probably 3 feet higher than the actual level of the water. He just uses a 2 or an 1.5-inch quarter-turn ball valve. He's got it now rigged up where he can sit in his chair and actually operate the quarter-turn ball valve as he's applying chemical, or let's say he's in a corner and turning where he needs to terminate the valve, he can just shut it off. There's no pumps to deal with. It's a pretty easy job to clean up too.
And my guess is he probably ran into the same things where his transfer pump
Yep.
was just getting eaten up by this alum. It's pretty corrosive stuff.
That's just a 2-inch or 1.5-inch PVC pipe. It's nothing too
Elaborate.
exactly. You know. And I've been with, there's several other communities. I know there's Jim from Audubon here. I helped him build a boat, and he just went to the boat company and bought a used pontoon boat. And we helped to beef up the middle of the boat and put the pontoon or the tank on there, and you know, he was into a pontoon, I think, for about $5,000. Now, he was on a real tight budget, but just to let you know that these things can be done by the operator.
So this is just kind of a quick, you know, step by step. I always wait for a sunny day, and I try to keep away from the wind just for the fact of how we do it. You know, he described the other process where they just open up the valve. It's probably not as important, but when we actually spray through the fire hose, you know, I mean, it's out like this, and if you pick a windy day, it's going to be coming back at you the whole time. So we try and stick with a nice day. And it's just more fun to be out in a boat on a nice day. So we use the transfer pump. I'm not quite sure how I went on the net trying to figure out how they figure out these numbers. We have numbers specific that were developed by our engineer for our pond system. I don't know how they got those numbers. I don't know if you can elaborate on that, but I guess, you know, we have 9-acre ponds. So if you have a 30-acre pond, you more or less just times it by 3 would be my guess.
I think where Matt's going with this here is to try to figure out when you add your product, how much chemical do you need to buy? Obviously, it's quite expensive, so you don't want to overbuy, but you don't want to underbuy because you don't want to add twice. So what Matt's engineer has done is actually put together a really neat kind of a graph that basically states if Matt's total phos reading from the lab is 2.1 parts per million, he then can work up on his graph and actually figure out how many gallons of chemical he needs to purchase, which is pretty nice. Another thing that we've done, I've helped a few communities do on the field, is we'll actually go out on site and run a jar test right in the back of the pickup, and we can actually run different dosages in the back of the truck, 100, 150, 200, 250 part per million dose, and we can actually test. We use an orthophosphorus test kit out on site, which is not a total phos, but with the conversion, we can get pretty darn close. Matter of fact, that's what most chemical companies will do. So we can do that for you if you would like, or at least get you in the ballpark to see where you're at, or how much chemical do you need. Every pond will be different because there's an actual demand that needs to be met in wastewater before the alum will actually work. So your pond to your pond to your pond, they might all be the same size, but you might use 2 or 3 times the amount as he would. So it's really important, obviously. You don't want to have to add one time, test, get your results back, we got to re-add again because we didn't add enough.
And then a lot of times if you do that, you end up out of your 2-week window, so then you're
Yes.
sampling for everything, all, your TSS and your, so that's why that 2-week window is kind of important. The other big thing I think is that you have to work with your lab as far as getting results quickly. That phos result, you kind of need it right away in order to be able to get your discharge going before that 2-week window expires. So I think that's kind of a pretty important part of this edition is working with your lab too. So.
On here to talk a little bit about patterns, actually, of the application.
Yeah, we actually do, it's basically like a Zamboni. You ever watch a Zamboni go around the ice? We go around the edge and then come through the middle and then around the edge and come through the middle. And you can tell where you've been. Actually, you can see, there'll be a picture coming up where it's like a lime green in the pond and you can see exactly where you've gone already. So it's actually a lot more simple than you would think. So.
And this exactly what Matt does out at his facility, these guys do the exact same thing. And coverage is very important, obviously. Mixing is extremely important so that you can get your chemical applied.
And the thing is, you want to be close to that one. You don't want to be getting down to 0.1 or, because every time you add alum, you're adding phosphorus to your pond. So every year, keeps building and building, and your sludge depth just, gets higher and higher and higher. So you do want to be close to that one limit. And what I found is a lot goes into your sampling of when you do it. A lot of times I'll do my sampling on like day 2 and day 5. The PC only tells you got to do it twice a week. They don't tell you when you have to. So I do it early, so I'm getting that supernatant of the pond versus getting down near my sludge depth, near that Tuchel level.
Sure. Because your phos results can change really quickly.
They can change real quick.
So here, just so you know what you're looking at, here's the actual flocculation starting to take place. The alum is starting to flock. Okay, so it's been mixed. You can actually see the clouds or the plumes underneath the water. So like Matt said, you can see where you've been, the coverage that you've been. You're going to watch it happen. So if there's areas that you're missing, you can go back and hit those areas. George, do you have a question?
I was just going to ask Matt, like in the spring of the year when you have your ice first goes out on your pond, you're going to get ready to do your pre-discharge sample. How soon after ice out do you wait for that the water to turn over before you do your sampling?
Yeah. So did everybody hear George's question?
Everybody hear it?
Basically, he asked, how long do I wait until after my ice is off, which in northern Minnesota where we live can be May sometimes. But I normally wait 2 weeks because, when water freezes and then it thaws, you have this big turnover of your pond basically. So you need all that stuff to settle out before you're able to discharge. So 2 weeks is around the time.
I was going to ask also, what made you go with broadcasting compared to injecting like into the prop wash?
What I found was that by spraying it.
The question was, why did Matt choose to broadcast with a hose versus go away from the actual injection or the pump at the back of the boat with a spray nozzle?
Yeah, and I guess what I have found is that when you spray it out, it's picking up this whole surface of the pond versus I don't get good coverage when I have done the same thing that they did where you just opened up the valve and let the motor kind of do its work. But I get a lot better coverage by spraying. It's all operator, Everybody does something a little bit different, but I found I end up using probably 200 gallons less to get the same result by doing the spray. So.
Okay.
But it is more complicated. I mean, all he has to do is open up the valve.
Let me ask you this question, Matt. When you go out and you start an application process, you start in the morning and you finish that day.
Yep.
When do you test then and send your TFOS sample after the alum has actually done the work?
The very next morning.
Okay.
You're going to take a sample from your four corners that next morning.
Go ahead, Pat.
Do you keep going with your pontoon then and keep stirring this after you've got all your chemical in it?
No. No, once I get it out.
Question was, does he continue to drive around the pond and have a little barbecue or something? Or does he, once he applies the chemical, you take the boat out?
And I think that kind of relays into the way I do it versus opening that valve. I think there's, you do get decent mixing with the motor, but you're good when you're able to spray it out. I like that method a lot better.
So you're not actually using a mixing method, you're just...
It still is mixing because we
Some
spray it
of
in the front of the boat and then, we drive over it basically with
Prop wash.
Right. And I'm not quite sure, but there's a lot of variables that factor in. There's pH. If your pH is lower than 7, that can really change how much addition it takes to get that result. So those are all things you're going to find as you kind of do it. Ponds aren't really good at getting rid of phosphorus.
Right.
They're good at everything else. Just quick numbers that we go through. We normally have an influence of right around 5, and our pre-discharge numbers
5 milligrams per liter.
5 milligrams per liter, and our pre-discharge is normally around 1.7 to 2ish. What I found is normally my first discharge of the year, I don't have to add because it's pretty old water. It's normally the second discharge that I end up having to add, and then same thing in the fall. It'll be the second discharge because that first discharge has that 180-day wait time. The second one doesn't because we're just having too much water coming in. So,
Question. How often do you clean out the sludge?
I never have. Not really. We had Frank come out and actually did some sludge depths, and we're under a foot on everything, including our primaries.
Yeah.
And they're from 87. So they're 25 years.
Even with adding alum, yes.
Even with adding alum, correct. Yep.
I was going to say, we just did our EPA, US EPA did a draft for our renewal of our 5-year permit for our stabilization ponds. And prior to the application, they came out on site, looked at the upgrade. We couldn't find additional land to put in another cell. So what they did was they raised my operating level from 6 foot to 7 foot.
Okay.
Raised the riprap, the additional foot or a little over a foot. So now I've only got 2 foot freeboard. But they were saying that if the ponds keep working the way they are, we should not ever have to do any removal of any sediment because the ponds are basically working the way they are. The bacteria there is stuff that's building up, but it's building up so slowly that you'll never have to clear
Sure.
it.
Well, I've done a lot of sludge judging in some of the oldest ponds in the state, and I know Big Forks is very old, and they were 18 inches or so, and they're 60 some years old. So I think it just depends on exactly what your community produces. I mean, if you're going to overload your pond, you're obviously going to build solids a lot quicker. If you underload your pond, which you have a lot of detention time, your water's going to clean up. Your solids are going to digest more. It depends on what you feed it, truly.
And some of it, you can get your influence down a little bit if you talk to, if you do some of that public education and stuff. The biggest problem area I found was our campgrounds. A lot of the holding tanks on the RVs have these deodorizers in there basically, and they're chock full of phosphorus.
About 99.9% phosphate.
Yeah, so that's where my big problem has been. Otherwise, a lot of your soaps and stuff don't have it anymore. So
Probably had to do that with maybe a phosphorus management plan or something, or at least look into it. Anybody have to do one of those? All around ask. We tend to see a lot of that stuff and maybe give you a pointer or 2 or 3. And like Matt said, if you have an RV dump in town and you're in the tourist community, every weekend you got 20, 30, 40 RVs dumping. So now I have to go add $20,000 or $30,000 worth of alum each year to remove phos from my ponds. The community or the people that are using your facility don't even live in your community, but your community is having to pay for a very expensive process. So maybe you should look at regulating these RV dumps. Typically, gas stations will just about do anything to keep that RV dump there, because of course they're going to buy gas and groceries and everything else. But, so every time they dump now, maybe you have to charge them 20 or 30 bucks. Something.
What is your average annual cost for alum addition if you have to do it multiple times?
Just chemical cost is right around $1,700. That doesn't include any, operator hours, gas for the boat, all those types of things. About $1,700 for us.
That's pretty reasonable, I would say, wouldn't you? I think there's some of you in here, a couple of these bigger communities are probably going to look at, maybe 10 times that amount. But every system's different. A lot of people in here are having to treat, so there's a lot of good resources for each and every one of you folks to talk to and find the best resources. Anybody here use ferric chloride in a pond? Do you? How's that work for you? Good? Okay. Ferric tends to work better, probably a little cooler water, but it's a mess. Doesn't always work better than alum. So there's a couple of different options that you can use. Anybody ever use dry alum? Okay, and then you mix it. Mix it in the boat. Yes, it is. It's a mess. You can get dry alum cheaper because it's about a 99% pure chemical. Liquid alum's about 50%. However, you're thinking you're saving money, you're probably going to spend 10 times the amount of time mixing it, and the mess is horrendous. Seen that too. So. Any more questions? One more. Donnie?
Hey, if you're going to have a septic pump or truck dump in your pond, is there any way you can test the phosphorus before you dump it, maybe add it to the truck?
You personally, if the question was, if you were going to allow septic haulers to dump into your ponds, how much phosphorus is in there? I'm not a huge advocate of septic haulers dumping in the ponds, at least when I used to work in a community that had ponds. It's very difficult, Don, because if you tell that septic hauler to test for phosphorus, well, now we got to wait 3 days and we got a full load in the back of my truck. Probably not going to happen. But I would bet you that the total phos would be quite high out of a septic tank. 20, 30, 40, a couple hundred parts per million. And the other thing is you may be bringing some metals in. You don't know what you're going to get when you do septic haulers. And I know we've talked about it, and this isn't specific to you, but it's kind of as a group. Be careful. So maybe the people need to test it first. I'm sure the hauler's not going to want to send in a test sample and pay for it. And then you tell them, no, I'm not going to take it this time because it's too high. More questions? Thank you, Matt. And like I said, if anybody has any questions, use these resources. Matt's done it a long time, probably more so than a lot of the systems out there. So pick his brain a little bit. What we're going to do here, we'll finish up, and then I've also got Scott here from Sturgeon Lake is going to share a few tidbits of information with us. But thank you, Matt.